The story begins with Ryou, a 19-year-old boy suddenly appearing in a strange white space. While trying to make sense of what's happening, a tall blonde man named Michael shows up and casually tells him that he's dead. Ryou recalls being ambushed by Truck-kun and half-jokingly asks if he's God. Michael says he's more of an angel, here to help with Ryou's reincarnation package. Ryou is stunned. He's really getting Isekaied, and Michael tells him that he'll have the freedom to live however he wants in his new life. Ryou, who has a laid-back nature, chooses a slow and quiet lifestyle. Michael agrees and explains that the world Ryou will be living in has magic, and about 20% of the population can cast spells tied to their elemental affinities. Ryou has a natural talent for water magic, and since he chose a peaceful life, the angel says he'll be living at a safe house in a forest, where there will be enough food for 2 months and a magic barrier to keep monsters away. After waking up in his new home, Ryou heads outside to test out his newfound power. He then checks the cabin and finds a cold room stocked with frozen meat, an empty bath, a knife, and 2 beginner-level guidebooks about herbs and monsters. He heads back outside to continue experimenting and finds he can create water just by imagining it with no need for incantations. Wanting a hot bath, Ryou discovers he can only make water at room temperature, so he goes full caveman mode and tries to start a fire by rubbing some sticks together but fails miserably. Then inspiration strikes. He creates a lens out of ice by visualizing water molecules freezing as their heat is drained. Using the ice lens and sunlight, he successfully starts a fire and enjoys a warm bath. That night, he realizes he can apply modern science principles to magic to improve his skills. The next morning, while eating dried meat, Ryou thinks about how he'll eventually need to hunt for food, so he starts practicing by launching water balls at a tree. While his aim is good, the impact is weak. Not discouraged, he attempts a high-pressure water jet, but it lacks power and barely travels, looking more like he's just peeing from his hand. Frustrated, he remembers Michael's advice: imagination and practice are the keys to mastering magic. So he keeps training, and by nightfall, he's able to produce hot water directly. The following day, Ryou attempts to summon ice crystals from thin air, inspired by his dream of using the icicle lance spell. It proves harder than water magic, but he continues training. Over the next several days, Ryou steadily improves, honing both his water and ice spells. Eventually, he decides to venture into the forest to find some food. While gathering herbs, he suddenly spots an angry boar charging at him. Frozen in fear, Ryou dodges just in time as the beast crashes through a tree. Thinking fast, he freezes the ground beneath the boar, making it skid uncontrollably. Then he summons a row of deadly icicles. The boar slides right into them and is instantly skewered. Victory! That night, Ryou checks his monster guide and learns that lesser boars are basically the tutorial enemies. Still riding the high of his first win, he flips to the last pages and finds 2 ominous entries. First, dragons, capable of leveling cities, best avoided at all costs. Second, demons, mysterious and lethal, and if you see one, just pray because it's game over. Ryou soon realizes the world is far larger and far more dangerous than he imagined, so he still needs to grow stronger. The next day, he abandons his clothes, going full Tarzan mode, and ventures deep into the forest. This time, an assassin hawk ambushes him, its first strike barely missing. The massive bird unleashes invisible wind slashes at him, and Ryou quickly understands this enemy is far out of his league. He retreats, throwing up ice blocks to shield himself while firing water jets as a counterattack. The hawk dodges effortlessly, then dives at him with terrifying speed. Ryou summons an ice wall at the last second and the hawk collides with it, losing one eye in the process before retreating. Shaken but relieved, Ryou tries to make his way home, only to realize he's lost. While wandering, he stumbles upon a glowing lake where a headless knight and its equally headless horse are standing on the water's surface. The sight leaves the boy stunned, and the knight soon turns its gaze towards him. Fortunately, Ryou makes it home unharmed. Over the following days, he continues exploring the forest, facing stronger monsters and refining his attack magic. One night, he returns to the glowing lake, where the headless knight is waiting. There's no mention of headless riders or Dullahans in his monster book, so Ryou wonders if they are too powerful to be classified as ordinary monsters or if they are something else entirely. Either way, Ryou is here to spar. He crafts a sword of ice and attacks, but his strikes never land, instead taking multiple hits from the knight and blocking them all with his ice shield. Eventually, exhaustion forces him to the ground. To his surprise, the knight does not finish him off. It was training him. The The knight comes over with a small crystal knife, coats it in water, then freezes it into an ice sword before handing it to Ryou, signaling that he should master this technique. Not long after, Ryou crosses paths with the same assassin hawk from before, only now it has evolved into a stronger form. The bird's wind slashes are much more powerful, tearing through Ryou's ice shields with ease. He blocks, dodges, and retreats, layering stacks of shields to survive its high-speed charges. His icicle attacks fail, and then the hawk shatters his defenses entirely with a sonic blast. Things go from bad to worse when it calls down a super-effective thunderbolt, shocking him in every sense. As it swoops in for the kill, Ryou draws his ice sword, parrying the strike and even slicing through the hawk's invisible wind blades. On its next dive, he drives the blade into its chest. The hawk crashes to the ground, and Ryou approaches it. They've only fought twice, yet he feels an odd kinship with the creature. He thanks it for pushing him to become stronger and then withdraws his sword, letting it pass in peace. As he begins his journey home, a dragon shows up. Certain this is the end, the boy is surprised when the dragon speaks to him via telepathy, asking if he's seen a black hawk. Ryou panics, fearing he has killed one of his subordinates, but the dragon is surprisingly calm and even impressed by the mage's feat. He points out that his weapon is no ordinary blade, but the sword of the Fairy King, surprising Ryou. Introducing himself as Lewin, the dragon spends the day sharing knowledge about the world, and by evening, he's summoned away, but leaves with a promise that they might meet again. Meanwhile, Michael realizes he overlooked an important detail in Ryou's status. It turns out that Ryou is only the second person in the Angel's entire 10,000-year career to possess a hidden trait, and that trait is none other than eternal youth. Weeks later, Ryou finds himself craving seafood and travels to the coast where he discovers a shipwreck. Among the debris lies a dead man. As Ryou examines him, a faint groan catches his ear. His eyes light up. This is the first living human he's encountered since arriving in this world. A man named Abel recalls fragments of his past, a giant octopus monster attacking his ship during a violent storm, the chaos that followed, and his fall into the ocean. When he opens his eyes, however, he finds himself in Ryou's house and realizes that he somehow survived. Immediately, he begins searching for others, but as he steps outside, confusion sets in. He has no idea where he is. At that moment, Ryou appears behind him. Abel is startled, not only because he hadn't sensed Ryou's presence despite being a skilled warrior, but also because of Ryou's unusual fashion choice. Choosing to be polite, he keeps his thoughts to himself. Abel introduces himself and thanks Ryou for saving him. Ryou explains that Abel was the only one he managed to rescue, as everyone else was already dead when he found them. Abel shrugs it off, saying the others were smugglers anyway. Before he can continue, his stomach growls, and Ryou suggests continuing the conversation over some breakfast. Inside, Abel can't resist commenting on Ryou's attire. Ryou admits he has no other clothes and lacks the fabric to make more. Abel tells him to just buy some, but quickly realizes that Ryou might simply be too poor. Ryou reassures him by explaining that he lives completely alone in this region, far from any settlements. Abel then asks if Ryou hunts for his food, and Ryou confirms it. When Abel assumes he uses his knife, Ryou demonstrates his water magic, explaining that most of his hunting is done with spells. Abel is impressed. Only half the world's population can use magic, and he is among the other half who cannot. This surprises Ryou, since Michael told him that only 20% of people are capable of magic. Abel then asks Ryou to guide him to the shore to check something. On the way, he insists on taking the front lines in case of danger, not wanting to rely on Ryou to save him again. Ryou agrees, and they soon arrive at the wrecked ship, only to find all the bodies missing. Abel assumes either monsters or the sea carried them away. Grateful once more for Ryou's rescue, Abel admits he didn't find what he was looking for and now just wants to reunite with his friends. However, since the storm had thrown their ship far to the south, he has no idea which direction to take. He suddenly proposes that Ryou accompany him, promising to help him secure a job in the city where he can live more comfortably. Ryou is shocked by the offer but considers it seriously. That evening, as he looks at the garden he has worked so hard to cultivate, he feels a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving it behind. Later that night, he tells Abel that he needs to say goodbye to someone. Though curious, Abel doesn't press the matter. Ryou heads to the lake, where the headless knight awaits. He thanks the knight for training him and declares he will fight harder than ever tonight before he leaves the forest for a long time. Drawing his sword, the magician launches a relentless assault, pushing the knight back. When exhaustion finally overtakes him, the knight silently retreats to the water. But before disappearing, he summons magic robes from the lake as a parting gift. Deeply moved, Ryou thanks him again and returns home. The next morning, Ryou and Abel prepare to depart. Ryou feels nostalgic, already missing the place where he spent so much time. As they travel, they encounter a wild boar, and Abel insists on handling it himself. Sword in hand, he uses a combat skill to kill the beast instantly. Impressed, Ryou asks what combat skills are, so Abel explains to him they are special abilities wielded by fighters who use weapons. That night, they camp inside a hollow tree, and by morning they resume their trek through the forest. Along the way, they encounter a group of lizard men lurking in a swamp. Abel decides to avoid them, knowing how strong they are, but Ryou senses that the creatures are trailing them even after they change course. Abel prepares for battle, and Ryou insists that he'll fight as well, warning that there are too many to handle alone. Abel doubts Ryou's ability to fight without a staff, but is stunned when Ryou instantly takes down 4 lizard men with his icicle lances. After the fight, Abel questions him about the spell. Ryou explains it was simply icicle lance, but Abel points out that even skilled wind mages can only cast 1 attack at a time, while Ryou summoned 4 of them simultaneously. Ryou brushes it off, claiming that water magic works differently. Abel decides not to press the matter and suggests they keep moving. Before they leave, Ryou casually conjures 2 ice cups, fills them with water, and hands one to Abel. Abel notices Ryou used a different incantation this time, but Ryou quickly covers by saying he must have misheard before. Abel then gives Ryou a coin, only to be shocked when Ryou admits it's the first time he's ever seen money. Abel had assumed Ryou was poor, but never imagined he was this poor. To distract him, Abel starts explaining about the political landscape. 3 major nations dominate the Central Plains: the Kingdom of Knightly, the Dabuhi Empire, and the Handlu Federation. Ryou immediately mocks the Dabuhi Empire for its name, rambling about how ridiculous it sounds until they reach a wide clearing. Suddenly, a nearby rock moves on its own. Abel reacts instantly and slices it apart, while Ryou blocks the flying debris with an ice shield. Abel realizes they've stumbled upon a rock golem nest. Confused, Ryou asks why they don't look humanoid, but Abel doesn't waste time answering. He dashes forward and blasts a hole through a golem, only to see it regenerate. Forced to retreat, he warns that their attacks won't work. Ryou then gets an idea. He summons a massive ice block overhead and drops it onto the golems, crushing them. Abel is stunned, having never seen such a spell before. Ryou repeats the tactic several times until the remaining golems are defeated. Among them, they discover a special rock golem carrying a large magic stone, which Abel says will fetch a high price, making Ryou want to collect stones from the other golems as well. But since they're buried under ice, he gives up rather than melting it all. They continue on and soon encounter a massive beast, a crocodile-hippo hybrid. Abel identifies it as a behemoth, an extremely rare and powerful monster he has never seen before. Ryou eagerly asks if they should hunt it, but Abel firmly tells him it's impossible. Just then, a group of wyverns appear. Ryou gets excited, expecting to witness a monster battle. The wyverns launch stone projectiles at the behemoth with magic, but the creature lets out a roar that cancels the attacks, sending the wyverns crashing to the ground. Ryou points out that the monster must have a magic cancellation skill. Later over dinner, Abel questions Ryou further about this ability. He explains that he's only ever heard of dungeon traps that can nullify magic. Ryou perks up at the mention of dungeons, and Abel reveals there's one in the city of Loon, their current destination. Ryou gets irritated that Abel didn't mention this earlier and jokingly accuses him of hiding other secrets. Abel then asks if Ryou at least knows about dwarves and elves, but Ryou admits he doesn't and asks for details. A few days later, they reach a mountain range. Ryou predicts they'll find human settlements once they cross, and Abel asks how he can be so sure. Ryou debates on whether he should reveal that he learned it from a dragon, but ultimately keeps it secret, saying only that it's knowledge beyond human comprehension. Not long after, a strange sound echoes through the forest, and both Ryou and Abel ready themselves for battle. To their horror, a griffin descends from the sky, its presence overwhelming. Abel panics, but Ryou quickly tosses a chunk of meat into the air, with Abel following his lead, and the griffin snatches both offerings before soaring away. Once it's gone, the two breathe a heavy sigh of relief, knowing they wouldn't have survived a direct fight against such a powerful beast. As they resume their journey, Abel remarks that no human has seen a behemoth or griffin in the past 100 years, likely because the surrounding mountains keep them from reaching populated lands. That makes Ryou recall the wyverns he saw fighting the behemoth in the north, meaning their nest must be nearby. His suspicion proves correct when they soon spot wyverns feeding on another monster. Ryou wants to engage them, but Abel warns that it usually takes at least 20 seasoned adventurers to bring down creatures of that level. Ryou, however, insists they can't avoid waiting forever and asks if it would be easier if the wyverns were pinned to the ground. Abel nods, saying he can handle one up close under those conditions. So without hesitation, Ryou steps forward and chants a dramatic incantation, only to summon 4 icicles that pierce the wyvern's wings and pinning them down. Abel seizes the opening and finishes them off. Before they can recover, 2 more wyverns appear, but this time, Ryou pins them down with icicles without an incantation at all, which makes Abel suspicious. Still, together they defeat the monsters, collect their magic stones, and continue onward towards the north. And that is where this video ends. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.